This is a True Crime in Real Time update from True Crime Today and the Hidden Killers podcast.
On a cold January afternoon in 2011, Ellen Greenberg's fiancé came home to a scene that would haunt him forever. Ellen, a vibrant 27-year-old teacher, lay lifeless on the kitchen floor of their Philadelphia apartment, a bloodied body stabbed 20 times, 10 of those wounds to the back of her neck. The horror was palpable, even to seasoned first responders. But as the initial shock gave way to an investigation, the case would become one of the most controversial and perplexing in recent history. Despite the brutal nature of her injuries, Philadelphia's medical examiner made a startling move. What began as a clear homicide investigation shifted when the examiner, for reasons still debated today, changed Ellen's cause of death from homicide to suicide. Suicide. 20 stab wounds, 10 to her neck, yet the conclusion drawn was self-inflicted. It's the kind of twist that makes you question everything you thought you knew about how investigations are supposed to work, and that's only the beginning. Over the years, Ellen's family has relentlessly challenged this ruling, fighting for the truth they believe the system has denied them. In 2022, they pushed to have her death certificate revised once again, backed by forensic experts who simply could not reconcile the extent and placement of her wounds with the idea of self-harm. Still, after all their efforts, the investigation continued to stall. This story is a web of medical mysteries, investigative handoffs, and heartbreaking frustration, a case that refuses to settle into the comfort of a clear narrative. The Pennsylvania Attorney General's office became involved in 2018, taking the case from Philadelphia's hands. But even that intervention couldn't resolve the deadlock. In August 2022, the responsibility shifted again, this time to the Chester County detectives. Each agency review, each meticulous examination of the evidence led to the same impasse: a staggering lack of proof needed to file criminal charges. And now, despite years of hope, that legal roadblock has finally closed, if only for now. This past week, Chester County officials announced that they had placed the case in inactive status, citing their inability to meet the burden of proof. Beyond a reasonable doubt, that is essential for any criminal prosecution. As heartbreaking as this decision was for Ellen's parents and friends, it wasn't altogether unexpected. The investigators' hands are tied by the available evidence, or lack thereof. In the language of criminal law, it's not enough to suggest or even to strongly believe that foul play was involved. It has to be provable, and for now, that standard remains unmet. How did it come to this? How does a case that began with 20 stab wounds, seemingly an unmistakable sign of violence, come to rest on such a frustrating legal technicality? That's the question that keeps Ellen's parents, friends, and even casual followers of the case awake at night. The Chester County District Attorney's Office, in their announcement, made it clear that their work is dictated by evidence, and that even the smallest misstep could risk any future chance of prosecuting someone responsible. Beyond a reasonable doubt isn't just a phrase, it's a threshold that decides the fate of cases like Ellen's. And here, it has cast a long, chilling shadow. Even with this setback, the case isn't technically closed. Pennsylvania law places no statute of limitations on homicide, meaning that Ellen's case, while now cold, could still be revived if new evidence comes to light. It's a small hope, perhaps, but a vital one. The investigators stressed that inactive status doesn't mean they've abandoned the search for answers. It simply reflects the grim reality of the current evidence, or lack thereof. Imagine, for a moment, the kind of psychological fortitude it must take for Ellen's parents to keep pushing forward year after year. To have seen the investigation repeatedly passed around like a cold, unsolved riddle with no end in sight. In a world where every detail must add up, their pursuit of justice has been met with repeated roadblocks. But they remain unbroken, unwilling to accept anything less than the truth. What motivates this unyielding drive? It's more than grief or anger. It's a sense of duty, a feeling that someone must speak for Ellen, whose voice was taken away in the most violent of ways. Her death is not just a case file or a list of inexplicable wounds. It's a life interrupted, a bright future cut short. This family refuses to be silenced, even as the system, time and time again, fails to give them what they desperately need: answers. One has to wonder about the forensic challenges that have made this case so difficult to prosecute. 20 stab wounds. That's not just a number. That's a grotesque reality that defies logical explanation under the label of suicide. The wounds to the back of Ellen's neck alone raise questions that almost no expert can answer convincingly, yet the burden of proof remains insurmountable. For now, Ellen Greenberg's story is yet another reminder of the gaps and ambiguities that exist in our justice system. But here's where it leaves us. Despite years of investigation and public scrutiny, Ellen Greenberg's case is still unresolved, still in the shadows of doubt and frustration. And as we move forward, we're left with the haunting realization that until new evidence surfaces, this case will remain an enigma. It's a story suspended in time, begging for clarity that may or may not come. From where we stand now, the case of Ellen Greenberg sits like a bruise that won't heal. A reminder of how deeply the divide between intuition and evidence can wound. This isn't just an academic exercise or a procedural formality. It's a glaring hole where justice feels stalled, paralyzed by the limitations of what can be proved. For over a decade, Ellen's parents have poured their energy and heartbreak into fighting for answers, a battle against a system they believe has misread or mishandled crucial elements of their daughter's death. They face setback after setback, and yet their perseverance remains unshakable. If you consider the case from a psychological perspective, the toll on her family is more than emotional. It's deeply existential. They're fighting not only for their daughter's legacy, but against the cognitive dissonance of how such obvious signs of violence could be dismissed as self-inflicted. Think about the 10 stab wounds to the back of Ellen's neck. That's not an act that aligns easily, if at all, with suicide. What kind of mental gymnastics did the officials have to perform to come to that conclusion? It's the type of dissonance that makes you want to scream at the sheer audacity of it. But then there's the cold, rational world of law and order, where feelings don't matter, where what you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt reigns supreme. That's a world that doesn't deal in emotion or grief. It deals in facts. And therein lies the dilemma. Investigators might be sympathetic, even convinced privately that something is off about the suicide ruling, but without that unassailable piece of evidence, they're stuck. The risk of pursuing a charge with insufficient proof isn't just a gamble. It could mean permanently closing the door on ever achieving justice. The Greenberg family, already bearing so much pain, knows this reality all too well. And yet, here we are, revisiting these details, compelled to ask why justice feels so elusive in Ellen's case. It brings up fundamental questions about how the justice system operates under immense pressure to be right, not just for the moment, but for the future. It's a system that paradoxically seems to work against the very people it's supposed to protect when doubts overshadow clarity. Ellen's story has become a cautionary tale, a flashpoint for how the law's demands for certainty can sometimes run counter to what we instinctively know to be true. What gets overlooked, though, in the shuffle of legal standards and forensics is how investigations like these expose human vulnerability, both in those seeking justice and in those trying to deliver it. You have detectives and lawyers who might believe in their hearts that Ellen was murdered, but who are bound by rules designed to prevent miscarriages of justice. But here's the painful irony. To the Greenbergs and many others following this case, the system itself feels like the miscarriage. And so we're left with a haunting question. In a world where legal standards demand absolute certainty, how many injustices are left unresolved? That's all for now. We'll keep digging and getting you the facts. Thanks for listening, and be sure to press subscribe so you don't miss any of our updates.
In a world where the darkest secrets lie just beneath the surface.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence says otherwise.
Where hidden killers roam, unnoticed, in the shadows.
I think you would definitely be looking at a blend of toxic very bad narcissistic personality traits, and they will be vengeful and possibly resort to violence.
Join Tony Bruschi as he uncovers the truth behind the most chilling cases.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence clearly says otherwise.
Each episode, we dig deep into the minds of those who commit the unthinkable.
To your point on narcissism, he thinks in his own mind how witty he is.
Yeah.
But he lost that jury. I was done with him in 2 minutes.
From unsolved mysteries to infamous crimes.
Geez, you've just talked about how you taught yourself how to do everything under the sun. I bet you did a YouTube video, how to best kill somebody with a knife.
Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi takes you where few dare to go.
How does someone with such a dark secret go unnoticed for so long?
With multiple new episodes every single day.
We're not just telling stories, we're seeking justice.
Listen now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.